I can still feel that day in my bones, the way the cold marble floor of the San Diego courthouse sent echoes of my crutches bouncing through the hall as if the building itself wanted everyone to notice my struggle. My palms were damp on the worn handles, and every step made my leg throb, but I held my chin high because I knew if I faltered even a little, they'd take it as proof I was broken. And there they were, my parents, Patricia and William, sitting side by side with that same smug calm I'd seen 1,000 times at family dinners when Vanessa stole the spotlight. They looked like people who thought the story was already written, like they were about to watch my defeat sealed in ink. But when I pushed open those heavy courtroom doors and stood there alive, scarred but standing, their eyes snapped wide open. My father's face drained so fast he looked like he might faint, and when he caught sight of the woman at my side, the one they never expected, I swear he forgot to breathe. In that frozen moment, I saw it all written across their expressions. The hope that I would stay buried in that hospital bed. The expectation that silence and shadows would swallow my name. They thought I was gone, erased, nothing more than a footnote they could manipulate. They were certain they had taken everything. My work, my future, the contract worth $10 million that had been my life's victory. I'd spent years building an algorithm I believed could save lives, pushing through lonely nights when my only company was the blue glow of a laptop screen and the faint hum of neighbors' televisions bleeding through the walls. To them, it was just a number on a page. To me, it was proof that all my sacrifices meant something. Maybe you've had those moments too. The ones where the people who should be rooting for you are instead sharpening knives behind your back. I'll be honest, standing there I didn't just feel anger. I felt something deeper, something almost childish, that ache of being the kid no one clapped for. The daughter always told she was too much or not enough. And for a heartbeat, I almost wanted to ask them why. But then I looked at Vanessa, perfectly composed, lips pressed in that sharp little smile, and I knew the answer didn't matter. What mattered was that I was here, breathing, walking, refusing to disappear. But to understand how I reached that point, to really grasp the weight of that showdown, you have to go back with me a few months. Picture this, me stepping out of a glass and steel office tower downtown, the California sun so bright it made me squint, my hands trembling as I held the contract that changed everything. $10 million. My algorithm in the hands of a healthcare giant that promised to change diagnostics forever. My whole body shook with joy and disbelief. I was 28, a woman who had clawed her way up in tech, and all I could think about was driving home to tell my family. I imagined hugs, maybe even tears, a proud smile from my father, a rare word of approval from my mother. I gripped the wheel all the way to our quiet cul-de-sac, rehearsing the way I'd announce it, imagining Vanessa's face softening with pride. But, as you'll soon hear, that drive toward home was really the start of everything unraveling. Remember the exact creak of the front door when I pushed it open, the way the smell of fresh coffee hit me before I even dropped my keys into the bowl by the entryway. For a second, I thought maybe things would be normal. Maybe my family would surprise me with balloons or a cake, some kind of celebration. Instead, I found Vanessa sitting at the kitchen table in her perfect blazer, her laptop open, a legal pad covered in her sharp handwriting angled just so. She looked like she was still at the office, like the whole world revolved around her deadlines. Her eyes lifted to mine, narrow, calculating, as if I had walked into her space uninvited. My chest was buzzing with excitement, though, so I ignored the tension and lifted the folder high, grinning like a kid who just won the spelling bee. $10 million, I blurted out. My algorithm got the contract. What I expected was a smile, maybe even pride. What I got was the kind of expression that makes your stomach drop before you understand why. Her lips twisted, not into a smile, but into something sharp and ugly. "Your algorithm," she said, her voice slicing through the room like broken glass. "You mean the one I've been babysitting in meetings? The one I made presentable?" I froze. There was venom in her words, the kind I had heard in her tone before, but never quite like this. It was the same voice she used when we were kids, when she'd snatch my toys and then tell Mom I had given them to her. Only now it wasn't dolls or attention at stake. It was my life's work. I tried to steady my breathing, told her gently that the code was mine, that the long nights and endless testing were mine. My voice trembled, not because I doubted myself, but because I could feel her rage pressing against me like a wall. She pushed back her chair so hard it screeched across the tile. That sound still echoes in my memory. She stepped closer, too close, her perfume mixing with the bitter coffee smell. "You think you're better than me," she hissed, her face inches from mine. In that moment, I could feel the ghost of every family dinner where she was the star, every holiday where my parents applauded her and barely noticed me. My hands went up automatically, not to fight, but to calm her down. I whispered, "This isn't about you." But my voice shook. She didn't care. She never did. By then, we were at the top of the stairs, the two of us squared off like enemies in a battle that had been brewing our whole lives. Her eyes blazed, and I swear I saw a flash of satisfaction before her hands slammed into my shoulders. The world tilted, air rushed out of my lungs, and the last thing I remember before the crash of wood against bone was her face, cold, triumphant, like she had finally proved something I didn't even understand yet. The first thing I remember after the fall wasn't even pain, it was sound. A steady beeping that seemed to come from somewhere far away, like a metronome keeping time in a place I didn't recognize. My eyelids were heavy, my throat raw, and every muscle screamed when I tried to move. Slowly, the pieces came into focus, the white ceiling tiles, the faint smell of disinfectant, the crisp linen tucked too tightly under my body. A nurse leaned over me, her voice so gentle it almost made me want to cry. "You're awake," she whispered, as if she didn't want to startle me. I tried to speak, but my lips cracked and the word caught in my throat. "How long?" I croaked. She hesitated, her eyes soft but guarded, and then she said, 2 weeks. You've been in a coma for 2 weeks. The words hit me harder than the staircase had. 2 weeks of my life, gone, erased, like a page torn out of a book. When I could finally form another question, it wasn't about my injuries or what would come next. It was about them, my family, my sister, my parents. Some part of me still clung to the hope that they had been there, that maybe I'd open my eyes to find my mother praying at the bedside, or my father awkwardly standing in the corner, pretending not to care. "Have they been here?" I asked, though I think I already knew the answer. The nurse shifted uncomfortably before she spoke. "No," she said softly. "No one has come. Your parents called once, early on, but they haven't visited." I felt my chest tighten, the heart monitor beside me betraying my distress with its sharp rhythm. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "Did they say anything?" I asked, though dread curled in my stomach. The nurse glanced away before answering. "They said, you brought this on yourself. That you embarrassed them." I stared at the ceiling, the sterile fluorescent light blurring through the tears in my eyes. Of all the wounds I carried, my throbbing head, my legs strapped into traction, the bruises that painted my skin, it was those words that cut the deepest. My sister's push had broken my body, but my parents' silence was breaking my spirit. Patricia had always favored Vanessa, praising her for every little accomplishment while my efforts were brushed aside. William was distant at the best of times, dismissive at the worst. Still, I had believed that when everything fell apart, they would be there. I was wrong. My triumph, my $10 million contract, was poisoned now, tainted by jealousy, betrayal, and the realization that the people who should have loved me unconditionally had chosen to vanish instead. The days bled together after that. Nurses came and went, adjusting machines and checking vitals, their shoes squeaking faintly on the linoleum. Meals were delivered and cleared away untouched. At night, when the halls grew quiet, I'd listen to the hum of the air conditioning and the faint rustle of footsteps, hoping one of them would be someone I loved. But the door never opened for me. My body ached from the fall, but the ache of abandonment gnawed deeper. The walls of that hospital room closed in tighter each day, the bland art on the wall mocking me with its cheerful colors. I clenched my fists under the thin blanket, reminding myself over and over that survival wasn't just about healing bones, it was about facing the truth. I was utterly alone, and I had to decide whether that would break me or build me. The emptiness of those days blurred together. The same four walls, the same mechanical beeps and hisses, the same footsteps of nurses who were kind but detached, their comfort limited to polite smiles and quick check-ins. I kept staring at the door like some foolish child waiting for parents who'd promised to come back but never did. Every creak of the hallway made my heart jump, but it was always just another staff member with a chart or a tray of bland food. Not once did I see Patricia's worried face or William's stiff silhouette, and with each passing hour, the silence pressed harder on my chest. It's one thing to feel like an outsider at family dinners. It's another to lie in a hospital bed, broken, and realize the people you bled yourself dry to impress don't even think you're worth a visit. Then one morning, without warning, the door swung open. At first, I thought I was hallucinating from the pain meds, because standing there was Vanessa, polished as ever, her arms folded tight, a smirk curling her lips. My stomach dropped. She didn't even look like she was entering a hospital room. She looked like she was walking into a board meeting, ready to crush a rival. "Still clinging to life, huh?" she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Every word struck like ice water, and my body stiffened, pain shooting down my leg when I tried to sit up straighter. I glared at her, though my throat was tight and dry. "Why are you here?" The words rasped out harsher than I intended, but I couldn't mask the hurt underneath. She leaned closer, her perfume mingling with the antiseptic in the air, and for a second I saw something flash in her eyes, something beyond cruelty. It was calculation. "Just making sure you stay out of my way," she murmured, her tone almost casual, like she was discussing dinner plans. Then she straightened her jacket, turned on her heel, and walked out with her heels clicking against the tile, each step echoing long after she was gone. That sound haunts me even now, those deliberate footsteps, the same rhythm I used to hear when she paraded around the house, showing off her awards while I clapped for her in silence. Only this time, the stakes weren't childhood trophies, they were my life. I clenched the bedsheet so tightly my knuckles went white, heat rushing through me despite the chill in the sterile air. Her words weren't just cruel, they were loaded, heavy, like she was guarding something much bigger than the venom she spat. For the first time, I felt the truth trying to claw its way into my consciousness. This wasn't just sibling rivalry or casual spite. This was a plan. Vanessa hadn't come to gloat. She had come to remind me of my place, to warn me that she was already moving pieces behind the scenes. And lying there, trapped in that bed with my legs screaming in pain, I realized that my survival alone might not be enough. I would need to fight for everything she was trying to take from me. I knew Vanessa's smirk wasn't the end of it, but I didn't expect the truth to land so hard or so fast. A few days later, when the nurses changed shift and the hallways grew quieter, I heard a soft knock on the door. For a second, my heart leapt, hoping it might be my parents finally showing up. But when the door eased open, I saw Cynthia Ross, my best friend since college, slip into the room with the kind of urgency you only see on someone who's been fighting for days just to get through. Her face was pale with worry, her eyes red-rimmed like she hadn't been sleeping. She leaned down, wrapped her arms gently around me, careful not to press against my bruises, and for the first time since I woke up, I felt something warm, human, alive. "They've been keeping me out," she whispered, her voice shaking with anger. I had to practically beg my way in. The relief of seeing her was like air rushing into lungs that had been suffocating. We sat there in silence for a moment, her hand resting over mine, and then she drew in a breath that made my stomach knot. "Lauren," she said, her tone low and deliberate, "Vanessa's been talking at work. She's telling everyone the contract is hers, that she's stepping in for you. For a second, I thought I must have misheard. My brain was still foggy from meds, but no, the words cut clean through. "She's bragging about it," Cynthia continued, her jaw tightening. "She's saying she was the one who pushed it through, the one who made it happen." I felt bile rise in my throat. That contract wasn't just money. It was years of nights coding until my eyes blurred, years of being told I wasn't enough. It was proof I had built something valuable. And now Vanessa was rewriting the story in broad daylight, making me vanish without a trace. I couldn't sit with it. Even though my hands shook from weakness, I reached for my phone. Cynthia tried to steady me, but I waved her off. I needed to feel in control of something, anything. The screen lit up and I tapped through to my banking app, hoping at the very least I could cover part of the medical bills piling up like bricks on my chest. Instead, a bold red message flashed across the screen. "Account frozen." I thought it had to be a glitch. My pulse skyrocketed as I dialed the number on the back of my card, the phone heavy in my hand. The woman on the other end sounded clinical, detached, as she confirmed the nightmare. "There's a court order freezing your funds," she said matter-of-factly. "It cites concerns about your ability to manage them." My voice cracked when I tried to argue. Ability? I had just clawed my way out of a coma, and already someone was trying to strip me of control over my own life. I stared at the monitor beside me, its steady green line mocking the chaos unraveling inside my chest. This wasn't just about Vanessa claiming credit at work. This was bigger, calculated. Someone was building a case against me, brick by brick, and the walls were already closing in. For days after Vanessa's visit, I kept replaying her words in my head, the way she leaned in with that smug little glint in her eyes. It hadn't been just cruelty, it was foreshadowing. She was letting me know she was already moving the pieces while I was stuck in bed. I could feel it like a storm gathering outside the window, and though I didn't yet know the shape of it, I knew she was orchestrating something that stretched far beyond family jealousy. And then, one afternoon, the storm walked straight into my room in the form of a stranger. He wasn't dressed like a doctor or nurse, but in a sharp navy suit, his tie perfectly knotted, his expression calm but weighted. He introduced himself as Aaron Whitfield, an attorney, and though his voice was steady, there was an urgency beneath it. He pulled a thick folder from his briefcase, its corners worn from being flipped through too many times, and laid it gently on the tray beside my bed. "I'm here about your contract," he said. My pulse shot up instantly. My hands trembled as I reached for the papers, and the room seemed to tilt around me as I began to scan the contents. Legal forms, court filings, my name typed neatly at the top, but as I flipped the pages, my stomach dropped. Stamped across them were declarations that I was incapacitated, incapable of making decisions for myself, and there, at the bottom of one page, was my signature. My signature, only it wasn't mine. I could feel my breath catch in my throat, my fingers shaking so badly I almost dropped the paper. "These were filed to transfer your $10 million deal," Aaron explained, his voice quiet but firm, as if he'd had to deliver this kind of news before and knew the weight of it. I gripped the sheets until my knuckles went white. I hadn't signed a thing. The only time I'd held a pen since waking was to scratch shaky notes to the nurses. My sister's smirk flashed in my mind, and suddenly the puzzle pieces snapped into place. This had her fingerprints all over it. I forced myself to ask how he'd even found me, my voice raw. Aaron leaned forward, lowering his tone. A colleague from my company, someone who had noticed my absence and grown suspicious of the story Vanessa was spinning, had reached out to him. He'd started digging, and what he uncovered led him straight to my hospital room. "The court order freezing your bank account was only the beginning," he said, flipping to another page in the stack. "These filings claim you're unfit to work, citing your medical records as proof." I stared at him, disbelief turning cold in my veins, then dread. My own body had already betrayed me once when it collapsed at the bottom of the stairs. Now my medical records, the very documents that should have protected me, were being weaponized to erase me from my own life. When Aaron told me that my medical records were being used against me, I thought maybe it was a misunderstanding, some clerical error or crossed wires, but the truth came knocking that same afternoon. A woman walked in wearing the kind of quiet confidence you don't often see in hospitals: measured steps, calm voice, a sense that she wasn't just another doctor running between patients. She introduced herself as Dr. Rebecca Holt, the physician who had overseen my care since the day they wheeled me in broken and unconscious. She sat down in the chair beside my bed, her face kind but serious, and tapped on the tablet in her hands. "I need to show you something troubling," she said, and the tone in her voice made my stomach twist before she even turned the screen toward me. She scrolled through my chart, pointing at notes that described me as deeply sedated, unresponsive, with neurological damage severe enough to suggest permanent incapacity. My breath caught as I read words that didn't belong to me, that didn't match my recovery, my very presence sitting upright in that bed speaking to her. "None of these entries align with your actual condition," she explained, her eyes steady on mine. "Someone added them after you were admitted. They made it look like you might never wake up." The words sank in like ice water, trickling through my veins. It explained why the court order had gone through so quickly, why my bank account was frozen before I even had a chance to breathe. This wasn't just about stealing money, it was about erasing me altogether. I lay back against the stiff hospital pillow, the room spinning. My sister's smirk in the hospital, her casual cruelty, suddenly made more sense than I wanted to admit. Vanessa hadn't come just to taunt me. She had come to reassure herself that the plan was working, that I was already buried under forged records and falsified signatures. And as horrifying as that realization was, part of me wasn't surprised. She had always been this way, hadn't she? Even when we were little girls, she'd grab my favorite doll right out of my hands, smile sweetly when Mom looked over, and somehow convince them I'd given it to her willingly. My parents would clap for her, call her assertive, and I'd be left empty-handed, staring at the space where my doll used to be. By the time we were 10, she had perfected the game. She'd pout or cry just enough to redirect attention whenever I tried to speak up, always twisting the story so I came out looking selfish or ungrateful. Our teenage years were no different. Vacation plans, who got the bigger bedroom, which one of us was more responsible. Vanessa always managed to win, and Patricia and William cheered her on as if she were the sun around which we all revolved. I had worked my whole life to step out of her shadow, building something no one could deny was mine. And now, lying in a hospital bed with my future rewritten in false medical notes, I realized she was still playing the same game. Only this time, the stakes weren't childhood trophies. This time, she was trying to take my very identity. I had spent years trying to prove that I was more than just Vanessa's shadow, that the girl who was overlooked at every family gathering could grow into a woman who built something that mattered. My algorithm wasn't just a project, it was my answer to years of being dismissed, my way of showing the world and my family that I was worth more than their scraps of approval. And yet, here I was, staring at forged documents and falsified medical records that painted me as useless. My own parents had likely turned their heads while my sister orchestrated the whole thing. I glanced at Aaron Whitfield and Dr. Holt as they sat beside me, their determination steady, their belief in me stronger than anything I had ever received at home. That belief lit something inside me. Vanessa thought I was broken, but she was wrong. I handed the stack of fraudulent papers back to Aaron, my voice steadier than I expected. "We're fighting this," I said, and for the first time since the fall, I believed it. His eyes lit with resolve, and Dr. Holt promised she would document every altered record she had uncovered. It was no longer just about a contract or money. It was about my identity, my dignity, my survival. That night, I lay awake, the beeping machines now replaced by the hum of traffic outside the hospital, and I knew I couldn't keep playing defense. If Vanessa wanted to erase me, then I had to step into the light and show the truth. Against every bit of medical advice, I signed myself out of the hospital. My body was still fragile, my legs screaming with each step, but anger carried me forward. I arranged to meet Vanessa at a small cafe tucked into a corner of San Diego's Gaslamp Quarter, the kind of place where people came to whisper secrets over strong coffee. I tucked a tiny recorder into my coat pocket, my hands clammy, my heart pounding so loud I worried people could hear it. As I limped inside, the smell of espresso hit me, mingling with the sound of clinking cups and low conversations. For a moment, I wondered if I was crazy to do this, but then I saw her. Vanessa sat at a corner table, looking perfectly at ease, her manicure catching the light as she stirred her coffee like she had all the time in the world. Her posture was relaxed, but her eyes were razor-sharp, scanning me up and down as I approached. She tilted her head, a mocking smile playing on her lips. "Well, look who's up," she said, her tone light but cutting. "Didn't think you'd actually make it." I lowered myself carefully into the chair across from her, the recorder silently capturing every word, and reminded myself that this wasn't just a sisterly spat. This was war, and I was finally ready to fight back. I knew I had to play it carefully that morning, even as the anger burned holes in my chest. I forced a smile, tried to keep my tone light, as if we were just two sisters catching up over coffee instead of enemies locked in a silent war. "So," I said, swirling the spoon in my cup to cover the tremor in my hands. "How's work?" Vanessa leaned back, smirking like a cat that had already swallowed the canary. "The contract's moving forward," she replied smoothly. "Someone had to step up since you're indisposed." My pulse thudded in my ears. I pushed gently, keeping my voice casual, though my jaw ached from holding it steady. "You mean my contract?" Her laugh was low and sharp, like glass breaking. "It's mine now," she said, with chilling certainty. "You weren't going to make it happen from a hospital bed." My stomach twisted, but inside my pocket, the recorder hummed silently, capturing every poisonous word. I clenched my jaw, reminding myself not to react, not to give her the satisfaction. By the time I left the cafe, my body felt as though it had been wrung out like a rag. I limped down the street, San Diego's late afternoon sun glaring off the storefront windows, trying to convince myself that what I'd just done was enough. I had her confession, but my gut told me this was only the surface, that Vanessa had layers to her scheme I hadn't even glimpsed yet. Back at the small apartment I was renting while I healed, I sat at the kitchen table, waiting for the knock that came right on time. Dana Keller introduced herself with a firm handshake and eyes that didn't miss a thing. She was in her late 30s, sharp, practical, with the no-nonsense presence of someone who had seen too many dirty secrets to be surprised by much. She pulled a folder from her bag and spread papers across the table in neat rows. "I've been digging into your sister's finances," she said, her voice steady. My breath caught when she tapped a line of transactions, large wire transfers moving out of Vanessa's account. "This man," she said, pointing to a familiar name, "received $10,000. The blood drained from my face as I recognized him instantly. A colleague from my own company, someone who had always been a little too eager to please Vanessa, someone I'd once thought of as harmless. Dana looked me squarely in the eye. "He's been forging company documents," she continued, "making it look like Vanessa was the lead on your algorithm all along." My blood boiled so hot it was almost dizzying. My life's work, my reputation, my name, being scrubbed clean and replaced with hers, like I was nothing but a placeholder. I pressed my hands against the cool surface of the table, steadying myself as the fury rose in my throat. It wasn't just theft anymore, it was erasure. And for the first time, I understood that Vanessa's betrayal wasn't just about money or envy, it was about rewriting history to erase me completely. The investigators' papers were still spread across my kitchen table when my phone buzzed. I almost didn't answer. I felt too raw, too rattled. But Cynthia's name lit up the screen, and something in me knew I needed to hear her voice. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Lauren," she said, her tone urgent, "I found something you need to see." A few seconds later, my inbox chimed, and I opened the forwarded chain of company emails, the glow of the laptop screen painting my apartment in harsh light. My eyes darted over the words, my breath catching in my throat as the truth spilled out in black and white. In one message, Vanessa had written directly to our boss, her tone confident, almost casual. "With Lauren out, I'm stepping in to replace her. The contract's in good hands." My stomach twisted as I read the words again and again, the way she had framed my absence like an inconvenience instead of a coma, like my very survival was nothing but a scheduling hiccup. Another email followed, dripping with arrogance, bragging about her vision for the algorithm, as if the years of code, the endless nights, the sacrifice had never happened, as if I had never existed at all. My hands shook so violently I had to set the laptop down, my chest tightening, as if the room itself was closing in around me. Cynthia's voice cut through the fog of betrayal. "She's been planning this for weeks," she said, her disgust palpable even through the phone. "Everyone at work thinks she's the hero now." I pressed my palm to my forehead, the sting of tears blurring the screen. Weeks. While I had been fighting for my life, hooked up to machines, my sister had been weaving her web of lies, charming colleagues, planting herself in rooms that should have been mine. She wasn't just stealing credit. She was rewriting history one email at a time, shaping a narrative where she was the genius and I was the liability. The weight of it sank deeper with every passing second. My colleagues, people I had laughed with over bad takeout during late nights at the office, people who had once celebrated my breakthroughs, were now being fed a story where I was invisible. And the worst part was, they believed it. They always had a soft spot for Vanessa, her polished confidence, her easy smile. I clenched my jaw, anger simmering under the ache of betrayal. It wasn't enough for her to shove me down a flight of stairs. She wanted to bury me professionally, too, to salt the earth so that nothing with my name on it could grow again. That night, staring at those emails, I knew I wasn't just fighting for a contract. I was fighting to reclaim my voice before it disappeared entirely. After Cynthia hung up, I sat staring at those emails until the words blurred into meaningless shapes on the screen. Proof. Cold, undeniable proof that Vanessa was dismantling my career piece by piece. It hardened something inside me, turned my grief into resolve. If she was bold enough to rewrite my professional life, what else had she already tampered with? Dr. Holt's warning about my medical records echoed in my mind like a drumbeat I couldn't shake. I needed answers, and I needed them now. With trembling hands, I dialed the number for the hospital's administration office. The line clicked, and soon I was speaking to a brisk woman whose clipped tone told me she had little time for pleasantries. I gave her my name, my patient ID, and the silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably long as she pulled up my file. I could hear her typing, the faint clicks of keys that felt like the ticking of a clock. Finally, her voice returned, tighter this time, almost reluctant. "There is evidence of unauthorized changes," she admitted. My breath caught, even though part of me already knew. "Entries were added that exaggerate your condition. They describe you as being incapacitated for months, maybe permanently." I gripped the edge of my kitchen counter, the laminate digging into my palm. "That's not true," I whispered, though the absurdity of needing to say it made my throat burn. I forced myself to ask the next question, though the words felt like glass in my mouth. "Who had access to make those changes?" There was hesitation, the kind that tells you someone is weighing what they can and cannot reveal. Finally, she said, "Only a few staff members. But," her voice dropped slightly, "we're also investigating an external request that came through a legal channel." I froze. Legal. My mind flashed instantly to Vanessa, her polished confidence, the way she knew how to charm lawyers, executives, anyone with power. I could see her walking into some office, perfectly pressed, laying out her case against me with that same smirk she wore in the hospital. The administrator's words faded as my thoughts spiraled. This wasn't about money anymore, not really. This wasn't even just about control of the contract. It was about burying me in a narrative where I was too weak, too broken, too incompetent to fight back. A narrative that would keep me sidelined forever while Vanessa slid into the spotlight without challenge. I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of my tiny apartment, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. For a moment, I felt the weight of it pressing down, the enormity of fighting an enemy who wore my sister's face but wielded connections I had never dreamed of. And yet, under all that fear, something fierce rose up. If she wanted me locked in a false story of frailty, she was about to learn that I was capable of writing my own ending. By the time I walked into Aaron Whitfield's office, I felt like my body was made of glass, still fragile from the fall, still aching from betrayal, but inside, I carried something solid. Evidence, proof, pieces of truth that no one could twist anymore. His office wasn't the sleek kind you see in movies. It was crowded with books, thick case files stacked high, the air faintly smelling of old paper and strong coffee. He sat across from me, his posture calm but deliberate, and said, "We're building a strong case." The steadiness in his voice should have soothed me, but all I could feel was the thud of my pulse in my throat. Fraud. Conspiracy. Words that didn't just belong in legal documents, they belonged to my family now. He spread the evidence across the desk, each item a piece of my stolen life. "We'll file in San Diego," he said, his tone clear and firm. "This isn't just a civil dispute. This is deliberate fraud meant to deprive you of your rights." I nodded, tracing the edge of the table with my fingers to ground myself, but my chest tightened with every passing second. Going to court didn't just mean standing up for my work. It meant facing Vanessa across the aisle, watching Patricia and William sit behind her, maybe even cheering her on. It meant seeing in their eyes, once again, that I was never the daughter they chose. Aaron leaned forward, his sharp gaze locking onto mine. "The recording you made is key," he said. "California's a one-party consent state. You're in the clear. Her admission at the cafe is admissible." I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath until I let it out in a shaky exhale. That tiny recorder, tucked in my coat pocket as my hands trembled over a cup of coffee, was now my lifeline. He laid out the strategy, the recording, the internal emails Cynthia had unearthed, the bank transfers Dana had tracked, the forged documents bearing a signature I never wrote. "We'll also call Dr. Holt," he added. "Her testimony on the altered medical records will dismantle their entire argument." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope, a fragile flame, but enough to warm me. Still, the weight of it pressed down hard. This wasn't just about winning in court. It was about dragging into the open the very people who had raised me, the people I had once loved, and seeing them for what they had chosen to become. Facing Vanessa's arrogance, Patricia's favoritism, William's cold indifference, facing not just their schemes, but the years of silence that had made those schemes possible. My hands trembled as I folded the papers back into the folder, but my voice was steady when I said, "Let's do it." That afternoon, I found myself back in the same hospital where weeks earlier I'd woken up to machines keeping time with my breath. This time, I wasn't in a gown or tethered to IV lines. I was in a conference room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and stale coffee. The blinds were drawn halfway, casting striped shadows across the table where Dr. Rebecca Holt sat waiting. Her posture was calm, her white coat neatly pressed, but her expression carried a gravity that made my stomach tighten. She slid a folder across the table toward me. "I've prepared a detailed statement," she said, her voice steady but edged with quiet anger on my behalf. I opened the folder, my hands trembling as I flipped through page after page of notes. Each line felt like a punch, entries added after my admission, descriptions that exaggerated the depth of my coma, words suggesting I would remain incapacitated for months, maybe forever. None of it matched the reality of me sitting upright across from her, alive and coherent. My heart raced as the truth settled in. Someone had deliberately painted me as helpless, as a shell of a woman who would never recover, all to justify taking away my rights. I looked up, my throat dry, and met Dr. Holt's gaze. "I'll testify to every discrepancy," she said firmly. "This wasn't an accident." Her conviction should have comforted me, and in some ways it did. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. But it also stirred up emotions I had buried so deep I almost forgot they were there. Walking out of that hospital, clutching the folder like it was a shield, I felt the old ghosts rise. Memories of family dinners where Vanessa dominated every conversation, her stories eliciting laughter and nods while mine barely earned a glance. I remembered my science fair project that won first place, and the way my mother brushed it aside to brag about Vanessa's artwork instead. I remembered my father's dismissive shrug when I showed him my first program, his words echoing still, "That's nice, but what's it good for?" The favoritism had been there all along, woven into the fabric of our family like a thread I could never cut free from. I had worked harder, longer, desperate to earn what Vanessa received effortlessly, and now here it was again, just magnified. Her lies elevated, my truth buried. But as the San Diego sun hit my face outside the hospital doors, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't that overlooked child anymore, begging for scraps of recognition. I was a woman with evidence in her hands, allies at her side, and the resolve to face down the very people who had tried to erase me. The storm inside me was no longer just pain. It was fuel. It's funny the moments your brain chooses to drag back when you're at your weakest. As I walked toward the courthouse that morning, the chill of the San Diego air cutting through my coat, I suddenly thought of being 15 again, standing in front of a science fair display that I'd poured weeks into. My project had won first place, the judges shaking my hand, telling me they could see a future in what I'd built. I had glowed with pride, ready to run home and share the news. But when I told my mother, she smiled politely, then turned and started bragging about Vanessa's art project, the one that hadn't even placed. My father nodded along, murmuring that my work was interesting, but not very practical. That memory stung more than the bruises still healing on my body. It wasn't just a childhood slight, it was the blueprint of how my family had always seen me, invisible. And now, here I was again, years later, the same pattern repeating itself on a much larger scale. Vanessa had shoved me down a flight of stairs and tried to steal my future, and still my parents had chosen her side. Patricia's voice echoing through the nurse's words. She brought this on herself, felt like a knife I couldn't pull free. William's silence was worse, that same cold detachment that had followed me through my life. Their rejection washed over me in waves as I neared the courthouse, so heavy I had to stop, my legs too shaky to carry me forward. I found a park bench across the street, its metal slats icy beneath me, and sat down with my coat pulled tight. The fountain in the center of the park gurgled quietly, its sound oddly soothing against the rush of traffic and the chatter of strangers passing by. I let myself feel it all, the hurt, the anger, the exhaustion. For once, I didn't try to push it away. I sat there staring at the courthouse steps, realizing this wasn't just about reclaiming a contract or $10 million. This was about the truth. It was about standing up for the 15-year-old girl whose voice was ignored, about proving to myself that I was enough, even if my parents never saw it. The air bit at my cheeks, sharp and bracing, and I drew in a long breath that burned in my lungs. My fists curled inside my pockets, not from rage, but from resolve. I wasn't just walking into that courtroom to face Vanessa, or even my parents. I was walking in to face every moment I had been overlooked, dismissed, erased, and this time I would not stay silent. The morning of the trial, I woke before sunrise, my stomach tight with nerves and resolve in equal measure. By the time I stepped into the San Diego courthouse, the air inside felt charged, as if everyone knew they were about to witness a reckoning. I sat beside Aaron Whitfield at the long wooden table, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles ached. Across the aisle, Vanessa adjusted her blazer with the same smug confidence she'd worn my entire life, though I caught a flicker of tension in the way her eyes darted toward me and then quickly away. The hum of whispers in the gallery quieted as Aaron stood, his voice steady, commanding. "Your Honor," he began, "we have undeniable evidence of a calculated conspiracy to defraud my client." My chest tightened as his words echoed through the room. This was it. Aaron started with the recording from the cafe, the one I had captured with shaking hands and pounding heart. Hearing Vanessa's voice fill the courtroom made my skin prickle. "It's mine now," she had said, her tone dripping with arrogance. The sound played back over the speakers, and a ripple of gasps moved through the gallery like a wave. I glanced sideways and caught Vanessa's expression. Pale, tight, though she tried to hold on to her defiance. I clenched my jaw, reminding myself to breathe. The proof was no longer hidden in my pocket. It was laid bare for all to hear. But Aaron wasn't finished. He moved seamlessly to the forged company documents Dana had uncovered, laying them before the judge one by one. Each page bore false signatures and manufactured narratives that painted Vanessa as the lead on my algorithm, as though my years of work could be erased with the stroke of a pen. My pulse thudded as the judge flipped through them, her brow furrowing. Then came the bank statements. Payments traced directly from Vanessa's account to Scott Harper, the colleague who sat stiffly a few rows back. His face was ashen, his body rigid, as Aaron announced, "These transactions prove collusion, Your Honor." A murmur ran through the room, and for the first time, Vanessa's composure cracked just slightly. Finally, Aaron presented the chain of emails Cynthia had risked so much to bring me. In them, Vanessa bragged shamelessly to our boss about stepping into my role, describing her so-called vision for the algorithm as though I had never existed. The judge scanned the folder Aaron handed over, her expression unreadable, but the silence in the courtroom felt heavy with judgment. Piece by piece, the web Vanessa had spun was being untangled in front of everyone. And though my heart hammered against my ribs, for the first time since the fall, I felt the ground beneath me steady. When Dr. Rebecca Holt took the stand, the air in the courtroom shifted. She wasn't dramatic. She didn't need to be. Her calm, precise tone carried more weight than shouting ever could. She held up the charts, her fingers steady, and explained how my medical records had been tampered with. "False entries were added," she said, her voice clear, "exaggerating Ms. Bennett's condition and suggesting permanent incapacity." Each word sliced through the silence, and I watched the judge's eyes narrow, her pen pausing mid-note. For the first time, I felt something close to hope stirring in my chest, fragile but alive. The truth was no longer locked away in files or whispered between allies. It was finally laid bare. Vanessa rose next, her heels clicking against the polished floor, and for the first time since this nightmare began, her voice wavered. "I was protecting the company," she insisted, her gaze darting nervously toward the judge. "Lauren was unstable, unfit to lead." The words stung, even though I'd expected them. Hearing my own sister speak about me as if I were a liability, as if my years of work meant nothing, cut deeper than I wanted to admit. But her confidence, the armor she had always worn so easily, was slipping. Each claim she made fell apart under Aaron's quiet but firm cross-examination, her explanations unraveling thread by thread. Then came Scott Harper, the colleague she had bought off. He shuffled to the stand, his shoulders slumped, his voice cracking as he muttered, "I was just following orders." He wouldn't look at me, his eyes fixed on the table, but I could feel the shame radiating off him. His excuses were weak, transparent, and I saw the judge's frown deepen with every stammer. It was one thing to betray me behind closed doors, but it was another to admit it under oath. For the first time, I sensed that the power Vanessa had always wielded so effortlessly was slipping from her hands. From where I sat, I could see my parents in the gallery. Patricia clutched William's arm so tightly her knuckles blanched, her lips trembling as though she might cry. My father stared straight ahead, his usual cold, distant demeanor beginning to crack around the edges. I wondered if this was the first time they'd truly seen the cost of their blind favoritism, or if even now they were trying to justify it. Either way, the truth was no longer something they could ignore. And then Aaron called my name. My stomach clenched, my palms damp, but I rose to my feet. This wasn't just testimony, it was the moment I had been fighting toward all along. When I rose and walked to the witness stand, it felt like every step carried the weight of my entire life. My heart hammered so hard I worried the microphone might pick it up, but I forced myself to breathe, to steady my hands as I faced the judge and jury. I began with what mattered most, my work. I told them about the long nights spent over my laptop, the countless lines of code that blurred before my eyes, the sacrifices that most people never saw. I spoke of the vision that had driven me, the belief that my algorithm could save lives, and then I told them the truth of what had been done to me, how my own sister had shoved me down the stairs, how I had woken in a hospital bed, alone, abandoned by the very people who should have been praying at my side, and how, in that fog of pain, I had discovered not just neglect, but a calculated plot to strip me of everything I had built. My throat burned as I spoke, but my voice did not waver. "They thought I'd stay silent," I said, each word heavier than the last. "But I am here for justice." The room was utterly still, the kind of silence that hums in your ears. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, weighing my every word. Vanessa's glare burned from across the room, her confidence slipping with each sentence I spoke. Patricia and William sat stiff in the gallery, and when I looked their way, they both turned their eyes down, unable to meet mine. That small act, after years of cold stares and dismissive shrugs, felt like its own kind of confession. For the first time, the power shifted. I was no longer the overlooked daughter or the shadow in Vanessa's story. I was the one speaking, the one forcing the truth into the light. When I stepped down from the stand, my chest ached. But it wasn't from weakness. It was from the release of years of silence. Aaron gave me a small nod, his expression unreadable, but his eyes steady, and we both sat as the judge called for a recess to deliberate. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, the tension so thick I could feel it pressing against my skin. And then the judge returned. Her voice was calm, deliberate, but each word landed like a gavel striking my heart. "The evidence is overwhelming," she said. "The defendant orchestrated a calculated scheme to defraud Ms. Bennett of her intellectual property and financial rights." My breath caught as the verdict unfolded. Vanessa, guilty, fraud, conspiracy, sentenced to prison. Scott Harper, too, guilty of forging documents, stripped of his career, facing years behind bars. And then, like an aftershock, the words I never expected: Patricia and William, complicit in enabling the scheme, facing civil penalties for damages. I sat there frozen, my world cracking open, not with despair this time, but with a flood of long-awaited justice. When the judge's words cut through the air, I felt my body go still, every muscle frozen as I waited for the sound to truly sink in. "The evidence is overwhelming," she declared, her voice unwavering, each syllable striking like a hammer. "The defendant orchestrated a calculated scheme to defraud Ms. Bennett of her intellectual property and financial rights." I gripped the edge of the table, bracing myself, and then came the verdict I'd prayed for, but hardly dared to believe I would hear. Vanessa, my sister, my rival, my betrayer, was sentenced to 4 years in prison for fraud and conspiracy. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, but all I heard was the faint whoosh of breath leaving my lungs, as though I had been holding it for years. Scott Harper was next, his face ashen as the judge read out his punishment: 2 years for forging company documents, his career in ruins. Relief washed through me, but the judge's voice hadn't finished carving through the silence. "As for the parents," she continued, her eyes steady on Patricia and William, "their involvement in enabling this scheme warrants a civil lawsuit for damages." I heard the sharp gasp that escaped my mother, saw her bury her face in her hands as if hiding could erase the shame. My father's shoulders slumped, his mask of authority crumbling, the same man who once looked untouchable now stripped bare before everyone. And then, with a final rap of the gavel, it was over. The sound echoed in my chest like a door slamming shut on years of silence and pain. As the courtroom emptied, I remained in my seat, watching the people I once called my family unravel. Vanessa's defiant mask, the armor she'd always worn so easily, had cracked. Her eyes looked hollow, her lips pressed tight, and for the first time she seemed smaller, diminished. Scott shuffled out, his head bowed low, his footsteps heavy with shame. Patricia clung to William's arm as they hurried away, their faces pale, their dignity dissolved into whispers and side glances from the gallery. These were the people who had dismissed me, diminished me, erased me, and now the truth had laid them bare for the world to see. When I finally stood, my legs trembled, but not from weakness. I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright San Diego sky, the sunlight washing over me like a benediction. The contract was mine again, yes, and my name had been restored, but what mattered more was the strength I had reclaimed along the way. I had stood up to my sister, to my parents, to years of neglect and betrayal. I had fought for my truth, and I had won. And as I took my first breath of free air outside those heavy doors, I knew I wasn't just closing a chapter. I was beginning a new one where my life belonged to me, and no one could ever take it away again. I remember standing in the middle of my new apartment, a small but sunlit place with wide windows that opened onto the San Diego skyline. The walls were still bare, the furniture sparse, but instead of emptiness, I felt possibility. It wasn't just an apartment. It was a sanctuary, my clean slate. For the first time in my life, I wasn't weighed down by the pull of my family's expectations or the ache of their favoritism. I had decided, no more calls, no more visits, no more bending myself into knots hoping for a scrap of their approval. Vanessa, Patricia, William, they belonged to a past I no longer needed to carry. The moment I accepted that, it was as if my lungs finally expanded fully, like I had been holding my breath for decades and was now breathing freely for the very first time. The legal consequences had been sharp and final. Vanessa's ambition, once so loud and blinding, had been reduced to a grey cell where she would spend the next 4 years. The court ordered her to pay restitution, $200,000 for the damage she had inflicted, not nearly enough to cover what she had stolen from my spirit, but a tangible acknowledgement all the same. Scott Harper, the man who forged documents to rewrite my story, was sentenced to 2 years behind bars and fined $20,000. And my parents, the ones who had abandoned me in a hospital bed and enabled Vanessa's schemes with their silence, were not spared either. The civil judgment demanded $75,000 in damages, but the real punishment was watching their reputation crumble in a community that once respected them. The fall from grace was theirs to live with, not mine. I didn't gloat. I felt no joy at their downfall, only relief. Relief that the grip they had on me was gone, that their betrayal no longer had the power to dictate my future. But as the weeks passed, a deeper realization began to settle in. My story wasn't just about revenge or reclaiming what was mine. It was about survival, about finding strength in the face of abandonment. And if I had felt that crushing loneliness in a hospital bed, how many others had felt it too, without a Cynthia or an Aaron or a doctor, Holt to step in and fight for them? That thought gnawed at me until I knew I couldn't just rebuild my life quietly. So I took a portion of my settlement and invested it in something bigger, a foundation in San Diego dedicated to helping victims of familial abuse and betrayal, legal aid, counseling, safe housing, things I had needed when I was most vulnerable. At the launch event, standing before a small crowd, I shared just enough of my scars to make my point. No one should feel alone in their fight, I told them, my voice steady, my heart open. The room was quiet, but I saw nods, felt the weight of recognition in their eyes. In that moment, I knew that what I had endured, as brutal as it was, could become a light for someone else stumbling in the dark. And that, more than money or vindication, was what it meant to finally be free. In the weeks that followed the trial, I realized I didn't want my story to end with the courtroom doors closing behind me. Winning back my contract and my name was vital, yes, but it wasn't enough. I had carried the pain of being abandoned in a hospital bed, of hearing that my parents thought I had brought it on myself, and I couldn't bear the thought of others sitting in that same silence with no one to fight for them. So I took a bold step. From my contract earnings, I set aside $500,000 and invested it into a new foundation right here in San Diego, one designed specifically to help victims of familial abuse and betrayal. It would provide legal aid, counseling, and safe housing for those who needed a lifeline out of toxic homes. For every person who had been told they were worthless, who had been left behind by the people who should have loved them most, I wanted them to know there was a place where they could be seen, believed, and protected. The launch event was small, just a modest gathering in a rented community hall overlooking the bay, but to me it felt monumental. I stood behind a podium looking out at the faces in the crowd, lawyers, counselors, survivors, friends who had walked with me through my own storm. My voice shook at first, but then it steadied as I spoke words that came straight from my scars. No one should feel alone in their fight, I told them. I meant every syllable. The room was quiet, but I could see the weight of recognition in their eyes. Some nodded, some wiped at tears, and in that moment, I knew the pain I had carried was finally being transformed into purpose. When the event ended, I walked outside into the late California afternoon. The sky glowed with that soft golden light that makes everything look like it's been touched by forgiveness. I thought back to everything I had endured: Vanessa with her calculated cruelty, Patricia and William with their indifference, the years of being dismissed, diminished, overshadowed. They had tried to erase me, Vanessa through her schemes, my parents through their silence. But their betrayal had not destroyed me. It had forged me. Now, in the quiet of my own apartment, I often catch myself standing at the window, looking out at the skyline. The walls are still bare, but they no longer feel empty. They feel like a canvas waiting for me to fill them with the life I choose. For the first time, I know I don't need anyone's approval to measure my worth. I have my name, my work, my strength, and the knowledge that my story might one day help someone else find theirs, and that is more than enough. When I look back now, it feels like every step of this journey was a battle I wasn't sure I'd survive. I'd fought through a coma, pieced together lies that were designed to bury me, and faced my own family in a courtroom that became both my battlefield and my reckoning. From that shaky moment in the cafe when I recorded Vanessa's confession to the long hours spent with Aaron building our case, every move felt like a gamble. But I learned something along the way. Justice isn't just about winning a verdict. It's about finding the courage to stand tall even when the odds are stacked against you, even when the people you once loved are the very ones trying to break you. My algorithm, the project that had started with late nights and stubborn determination, was back in my hands. Sitting at my desk now, I already imagine its next phase, bigger and more impactful than I ever dreamed. But when I think about what I truly gained, it isn't just the contract or the restitution. It's the lesson that ran deeper than any professional triumph. For years I had chased validation like it was oxygen, hoping my parents would finally see me, finally love me for who I was. Each achievement was an offering they never bothered to accept. And yet, in that sterile hospital room, hooked to machines, abandoned by the people I thought I could count on, I stumbled across something more precious. I found my own strength. It didn't roar at first. It whispered, reminding me that my worth was never theirs to decide. Vanessa's cruelty, Patricia and William's indifference, they had all been mirrors reflecting their own flaws, not mine. My survival, my fight, my victory was proof that I didn't need their approval, not then, not ever. Sometimes, late at night, I stand by the window of my apartment, looking out at the lights of San Diego glittering against the dark sky. Each sparkle feels like a reminder that life moves forward, that possibility is endless. I whisper to myself what it took me nearly 3 decades to believe: I am enough. I am strong enough, smart enough, worthy enough to build a life that is entirely my own. And as the city hums below me, I know with absolute certainty, no one can take my future unless I hand it to them, and I will never hand it over again. And before I wrap this up, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt like the people closest to you didn't believe in you, or maybe even stood in your way? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and your stories matter more than you know. If this journey hit you the way it hit me telling it, make sure to tap that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. It helps more than you realize, and honestly, it means the world to me knowing you're out there listening.